could find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmers.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. And today's episode is
America in Therapy, an interview with Phyllis Leavitt.
And we just finished that interview. And of course, the title American Therapy is the title of her book. Really interesting book. I did read it, and it is all about the idea that much of what troubles us as a nation can be viewed through the lens of a mental health crisis. And so therefore suggests...
we certainly are having a mental health crisis.
One way to look at it. There are other ways too.
Well, when you hear the statistics about depression is on the rise.
Oh, absolutely.
Loneliness, all these symptoms, I think she's right. I think we are in a mental health crisis right now.
We are indeed. So check out that interview, and of course, we're always interested in feedback, so let us know what you think. Let's put in some plugs for our exciting developments around here.
Okay.
I'm still glowing from the relatively recent, when you see this, it will have been a couple of weeks, the release of my new book,
Yes.
Betrayal and Forgiveness.
How to navigate the turmoil and learn to trust again.
Yes, that is my brand new book that is out just very recently. And it's all about, well, actually, we touched on some of the themes in our interview that you'll see when you get to the interview, but it's all about the pain and turmoil and shock and anger and all of the above that people go through when they go through a betrayal.
Sure.
And so it's how to get through that. And you'll find in the book there are 12 couples, and it's I think I said this in our last episode. It's not a novel, but it has that element of, I want to follow these stories and see what happened.
Yeah, and it's compelling because if you've lived long enough, which is not to say that long,
you don't even have to be that old.
You don't have to be that old. You could be a kid, a teenager, in your 20s, 30s. There's got to be some betrayal in your life.
Yep.
Whether it's from a family member, a teacher, somebody at school, a friend, a business partner, whatever it is. There's somebody in your life that has either betrayed you or you have betrayed somebody. So.
or both in some cases.
Or both. Exactly.
Yeah, and the betrayal, and I mentioned this in the book, and actually I'm starting to do some videos I'm putting on social media just talking about little aspects of this.
Yeah.
What makes it a betrayal? It's not just that you get hurt.
Right.
It's also that you get hurt by someone you never would have thought would have been the one to hurt you.
Right.
And the third thing that then hits you is now you have to question your own judgment.
Right, because often it's somebody that you're very close with and that you've trusted, and that's what makes it a betrayal as opposed to, okay, he just pissed me off or hurt me, or, I can get over that. But, when it's somebody that's close to you, it's not that easy.
Yeah, a stranger can hurt you, but a betrayal has to come from someone you have some expectations of. And, reasonable expectations
and
of,
a relationship with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So do check out that book. And of course, let's talk about what we have been referring to as our sponsor, good old Laria, who we've now identified. We've outed Laria.
Good old Laria, yes, Laria Zilber, my alter ego, who wrote the Blue Tent Erotic Tales from the Bible.
Yes, beautiful erotica. If you like erotica, or if you haven't tried erotica, this is a good one to start with. It is really beautiful. Share it with someone you love, or just read it by yourself. It's fun either way. And it is also deeply immersed in love of Torah. It comes from a Jewish perspective.
Bible, Old Testament.
And Bible in general. And it's not exclusively Jewish, but we happen to be Jewish, and Judy is we are both actually quite knowledgeable about Torah and such. So please check that out. So let's get to our interview, and we will see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Phyllis Leavitt. Phyllis has been a psychotherapist for over 3 decades. After she got her training in counseling, she co-directed a sexual abuse treatment program in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then went into private practice. In her work as a psychotherapist, Phyllis treated children, families, couples, and individual adults, often dealing with the effects of abuse and dysfunctional family dynamics. Phyllis is the author of 2 previous books, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire. Her latest book, is America in Therapy, a new approach to hope and healing for a nation in crisis. Phyllis, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And we always like to start with our guests just by asking, how did you get into the work you do? Tell us something about your own journey into this.
Yeah, well, probably like a lot of people, I became a psychotherapist because I went to therapy myself
Mm.
in my mid 30s, kind of at the, pit of my life, dark times, very dark times. And I grew up, not thinking anything about psychology. Nobody talked about it. And then when I finally did kind of hear about it, it wasn't something that people I knew did. But when I was in my mid 30s, a lot of my friends started uh, going to therapy, and I went too. And it really changed my life to understand that my early conditioning had everything to do with where I was in my present life, where I felt blocked, why I wasn't attracted to the kind of relationship that was healthy for me, that kind of thing. And it was a very deep unraveling process that was life-changing. And out of that, I went back to graduate school and got my own degree and became a therapist myself. And yeah, it was a wonderful. I just retired this summer, but has been a wonderful career.
Ah, yeah. So, of course, we want to know about your book, America in Therapy, it's an interesting title. I have to say, I did read your book. So
Oh,
I did have a chance to read it and enjoyed it and found it really sort of thought-provoking. I'm curious, what stimulated you to write it, and just tell us about it.
no, well, thank you for reading it.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I mean, there were a couple of really big ahas. I had trauma in my early childhood, and that was what really set me up to, not really be disconnected from my most essential self and feel blocked in so many ways. And it was very painful childhood for me. And, as I became a therapist and did my own work, I realized how many people there are in the world, that I wasn't alone at all, which is one of the after effects, I think, of abuse in childhood, is that you feel very alone in your own psyche. And I realized that I wasn't alone, that there are millions of people like me who have suffered early childhood trauma or any trauma in their life, and many of whom don't have any access to help and never get help and are a mystery to themselves about why they react the way they do, or why they're stuck the way they are, or why certain things aren't working in their life, or why they're in a rage or addicted, or all the things that can happen to people as a result of not getting help for the things that hurt them. So I began to think about, there's people all over the world who are in wars, who are discriminated against for poverty or the color of their skin or their religion or their gender. Um, and they're traumatized people. And we have a world full of traumatized people who are just doing the best they can to survive, and sometimes not doing it well. Um, so that was the first big aha that made me think about writing a book about the effects. The original idea was to write about trauma on a world level. And then as I had more and more experience as a therapist and was studying family systems and working with family systems and uncovering my own family systems, I realized that the dynamics of the family are really what we're dealing with, that there's family dynamics in the workplace and in schools and in houses of worship and in communities and states and in governments, and that the lens of family systems and understanding how family systems work, for better or for worse, whether they're healthy or abusive or neglectful or dysfunctional, that I felt like we really needed that information to understand what was going on in America today. And so I narrowed my focus down to America because this is the country I'm really familiar with, and I can't speak for other places, although I know that many of the dynamics that I talk about are happening all over the world.
Mhm.
Uh,
Why
and
do you
so,
think America is suffering from this mental health crisis?
I think there's so many different factors that have all kind of converged in a perfect storm today. And I think some of them are economic, and I think some of them are intergenerational, and I think some of them are probably, an escalation of the divides along many lines: gender, religion, all of that. But so my lens is the psychological lens. I can't speak for every lens on why we've gotten to where we are, and I don't pretend to do that. But on a psychological level, I think that our families are really suffering. My experience as a psychotherapist working with, average people, not a highly, not even a highly dysfunctional population, um, is that there's so much pain in people's lives that families are really stressed. For one thing, I think today there's, when I grew up, nobody I knew had a working mother.
Mm.
And today, I don't know hardly anybody where there aren't two working parents. And I think there's a lot less attention on children. I think social media and technology is fabulous for what it can do and not fabulous for how we're not understanding the best use of that for our mental health. Um, so I think that I just think the basic bottom line, which is our family structures, are not getting the attention and the resources and the focus that they really need to create healthy people, to create people who will come out of their families as, who have good skills for communication and conflict resolution and cooperation with other people and tolerance of diversity. I think and it's escalating so fast. And I think our culture has kind of run away with itself. And I think we need to put on some big brakes and look at what we're actually doing here. And is it good for us? Just like, certain foods taste really good and they're addictive, or they're so sweet, or they're so sugary, or they're so salty and we want more, but are they good for us?
Mhm.
And I think we have to look at that on a psychological level. And I think we have to look at it not only on the family level, but the national level and really the global level.
Yeah, no, I was really curious as I read through, some of your ideas, and maybe you can talk about that. How do you turn that into something on the national level? When you're talking about a family, they will show up in our offices, perhaps not all, many won't,
Right,
but
right,
some will.
right,
And
right.
so we'll intervene in those ways that we know how to intervene. But what do you do on a more, on a global level, or even on a, community-wide level, and to say nothing of like a national level?
Right. Well, I think one of the first places is education. And that's one of the main reasons why I wrote my book, is because I think a lot of people aren't familiar with how dynamics play out in the home, that you can also extrapolate and look at how they're playing out in the country. And if we don't know what's happening to us, it's much harder to address. So one of the things that I talk about is that, we're sort of being conditioned to believe that we're suffering from these huge partisan and ideological divides, and that's, it's sort of like the battle between good and evil is what it's evolved into.
Yeah.
And really, how I see it through the lens of psychology is that it's it's not essentially a partisan or an ideological divide. It looks that way, but it's really a mental health issue on a very broad scale. And by that I mean that people who are mentally healthy, who have internalized some kind of restraint and responsibility for themselves, who are committed to, people who are mentally healthy are committed to working it out, or
Mm.
leaving each other alone in peace if they really can't work it out. And so to me, that's a mental health issue. Conflict, I think, is inevitable. I think disagreement about our values or what we want or how to do it is inevitable, and it's actually a good part of
Yeah,
being a
it's
human
not a
being.
bug, it's a feature, right? It's
Right,
yeah, yeah.
right.
I'm
We
trying to
need
remember.
lots of different opinions, but we don't know how to handle conflict.
Yeah.
And that is a mental health issue as far as I'm concerned.
I forgot which New York Times columnist it was. This is a few months ago, was writing, it might have been David Brooks or it might have been Nicholas Kristof. Anyway, whoever it was talking about the big divide these days is less about, left versus right and more about extreme versus moderate.
Right,
That because you get extreme views on both sides where it turns ideological. I actually wrote about this in one of my previous books, that the tendency to take ideas which are generative and sort of open up things and turn them into ideologies which are closed, that's where things go awry. So that even good ideas, when they turn into ideologies, become caricatures. You're describing, and it was interesting as you're describing it, because you're talking about that as a mental health issue, like that it can be addressed through a lens of mental
Right,
wellness, right?
right,
So
right,
I'm curious about what kinds of interventions, if you think of it in terms of mental health,
right,
like what
right.
helps? You said education is one. What else helps
Well,
on?
educating the public is part of it because we can't advocate for mental health on higher levels of government, for instance, if we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
If we're conditioned to believe that good is fighting evil here and we're going to take sides and pull out guns if we need to, then we're going to have what we have.
Mhm.
And if we understand that when people get a chance to heal their own wounds and be loved and accepted for who they are and feel safe and be provided for, they don't want to do these things. They don't want to fight. They don't want to pull out a gun. They want to sit down and work it out and reconnect with other people. And one of the things, you as couples therapists know better than anybody, that the win-lose paradigm that we're suffering from kills relationships.
Yeah.
And so if it kills a relationship on an ordinary one-on-one level, it's killing relationship on a national level. And we need some way to, like one of the things that I propose, and you probably read all this if you read the book, what if we had trained facilitators in Congress that actually taught people how to communicate non-violently and with teaching people, showing people the value of that and what it would mean to actually take responsibility for yourself and your own actions instead of keeping on pointing the finger and expecting somebody else to change. These are all things we do with couples and families, right? Um, and so taking those principles and applying them to politics, whether we're, writing an article about something going on, or you're talking about when people actually come together to make policy and talk about laws that they want to embody and whose voices are we listening to? In a family, if one person is dictating, what kind of family do you have as opposed to a family where everybody has a chance at the table and people are respected?
You know what
On
I've
and on,
ever
you know what I'm
found.
talking about.
Yeah, the tricky part of that approach, and I'm not saying it's a bad approach, but there's a tricky part of that one, which is, okay, how do you deal with the facilitators themselves? I think a lot of folks on across the political spectrum would tend to agree, yeah, the problem is discord more than it is good and evil. And yet a lot of folks will say, well, the trouble is the other side demonizes us. Whichever side you're on, the other side demonizes us. We're not demonizing them, but they're demonizing us, which of course is a way of demonizing them.
Exactly.
So I'm imagining those facilitators you could have in Congress. I can just hear folks, I think especially more on the right, I could imagine this, folks saying, oh, those are those liberal psychologist types who are looking down on us and they're treating us badly, as opposed to, well, actually, I'll throw in another author. I don't recall if you quoted several people that are some of my favorite authors, and I'm spacing out on who they are. I don't know if you mentioned Jonathan Haidt. Did you mention him at all?
No.
Yeah. Do you know his work?
No.
He's a psychologist who's done a lot on what's called moral foundations theory.
Oh,
And I found one of his books from about 12, 14 years ago called The Righteous Mind, an incredible explanation of how it is we can have this polarization with all these people that aren't crazy, but look at everybody else as crazy. And it's
right.
because we're looking at different aspects of what's important. And there's actually way more overlap than we often think there is. But folks on the right will tend to look at authority as an important value, a respect for authority. People on the left will tend to look at that. Us old hippie types would have question authority bumper stickers. There's some differences about what's basically important,
Right.
that where a lot of the differences occur. There's also a lot of overlap in things like everybody wants people treated fairly. They may have different understandings of what fairly is. Anyway, I'm just curious, how do you handle that? Because, in reading your book, it was like, well, you're coming from a perspective that if someone we sort of come more from the left than from the right in our, as, and we're actually, I'm the couples therapist, and Judy is actually a regular person. She's an educator. But that that phenomenon, among therapists, it tend the more the left perspective tends to be represented than the right. So I'm imagining folks on the right looking at that and saying, oh, this is somebody who's just disdaining anybody who disagrees. And yeah, how would you find people who could bridge that gap?
Well, for one thing, I think that some of the extremism that we're seeing is a result of what I would call an addiction to power. And I think when people become addicted to power, which is part of an abuse family dynamic, that somebody has all the power, that they'll justify the part of that dynamic is to justify whatever you do.
Mhm.
And then there's a certain amount of brainwashing that goes along with that. So I think that's part of what's happening, is that there are many people who are not being exposed to a lot of different perspectives, and they're really being indoctrinated to believe that there is this good versus evil thing that you can, look in the Bible or whatever to justify, and there's no other perspective being brought to bear, when in fact, from my perspective as a therapist and through the lens of psychology as I have experienced it, it's our wounding that sets us up to have these very dysfunctional, abusive behaviors, justify abuse, feel entitled to abuse, might versus right, good and evil, all of that. These are when people heal, get a chance to heal what's happened to them that's hurt them from other people, where they weren't safe, or they weren't heard, or they weren't provided for, or they were excluded. When they have a chance to heal, they don't perpetrate those kinds of extremes. I've never seen that happen in all the years I've been a therapist, and I've worked with people who have suffered terrible abuse and neglect. And when they've had a chance to be heard and be seen for their essence and work through some of the worst effects of what's happened to them, they become more loving, compassionate people who are more relational. And and so I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think we have to start at the individual level, and we have to address the collective all at once.
Mm.
How do you do that? I mean, people that come for therapy are obviously seeking, they want to get better, but there are an
Right.
awful lot of people out there that are in pain, are in trouble, and don't want to go for therapy. So how do you reach those people?
Right. Well, I think we start, I mean, where do you start? I think we start with ourselves and with the people. For anybody, it's the people you can reach, because nobody really knows the ripple effect of, if you're a more compassionate person, you're more tolerant, you look at somebody of a different religion, or wearing different clothes, or having a different hairdo, or different skin color, or whatever they are that's different than you, and you treat them as an equal human being. We don't know what the ripple effect of that might be on that person's life. So I think we just commit to what the reach is that we each have. And for some people like me, I never thought I would write a book like this,
Mm.
ever. Like, I'm an introvert, I'm a one-on-one person, you know, um, but I felt compelled to write it because of my experience, and I felt like I needed to share it. And I think people are actually really doing this all over the country and probably all over the world. They just aren't reaching the headlines.
I think
Um,
you mentioned Braver Angels, did you?
I
As
was just going to bring
yeah,
that up.
yeah.
And actually, when some of my work promoting this book dies down, I'd like to see if there's a Braver Angels group around where I live, because I'd like to participate. And I ended up doing a podcast with someone who's very, very active in Braver Angels. And he said there's thousands of groups all over the country, but they're not in the headlines
Mhm.
necessarily. So
Yeah,
I
for
think
those not familiar with it, tell us about Braver Angels.
well, the little that I know is that it's a grassroots organization that's dedicated to bringing people together, red and blue together. And they actually organize sit downs with people of different persuasions. And the thing that I quoted in my book was one of the quotes from one of the participants, who said, when we actually sit down and talk, we're not that different.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's really this extreme end of a quest for power. That's one way of looking at it. I'm not saying it's the only way of looking at it. Um, that is presenting it to the American public like it's really the masses and masses of people are on these great divides. And not to say that there aren't people who are, being conditioned to believe in the great divides. But the average person really wants the same things. We all want love. We all want belonging. We all want to be safe. We all want to be provided for. We all want to feel like our children have a future. I mean, I think that those human needs, and if they were addressed in politics, if that was the focus of what we were hearing coming out of Congress, for instance, we'd have a different country.
What was the country? Is it Nepal, I think, that has a Department of Happiness?
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah.
Whatever that country is, I've heard of that. And I think we need a Department of Peace and a Department of Happiness and a Department of Psychology and, and make a psychological understanding, for one thing, part of our regular education.
It's interesting. I just saw an article, I think it was yesterday, might have been in the New York Times. I don't know. It was talking about how in all places you never would have thought, but in Miami, and it's spread to other parts of Florida, they have needle exchange programs.
Wow.
And representatives of, Ron DeSantis's government were showing up to learn about it.
Wow.
And you'd think, politically, generally
Right.
the right scorns that idea of harm reduction.
Mhm.
But what the person who was in charge of this program was pointing out was you have to speak to their concerns, which are legitimate concerns, and show them data. And they showed them data that said there are way fewer needles, lying around now since they instituted these programs. The overdose rate in Miami, that area, and they can't prove it's just from the needle exchange program, but it was far less of a spike than in the rest of the country.
Oh,
And so, they're showing people data because people are actually genuinely concerned. People who look at something and are horrified by it, nevertheless, still have common concerns with people who are advocating it. They both want to save lives. And it's that was another thing the head of the program pointed out. When you're talking to Republicans, stress the pro-life aspect of this. You have to save people's lives in order for them to then heal. And that was very persuasive to a lot of these folks that, people on the left wouldn't have expected would be into it. So, I look at things like that with a great deal of hope. It's like, wow, there's room for common cause here.
right. And that is hopeful. And I think those things are actually happening all over the country. In different ways. One of the things that when I did, a certain amount of research for my book, and one of the things that I came across is, and I don't have the figure in front of me right now, but the enormous number of people who volunteer their time in America to help other people, more than 50%. I mean,
Yeah.
it would just, and who give money to help people in need. And so all of the, like our hearts are there. And I think people are just waiting to have stronger messages coming from places of higher authority that speak to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of the things Jonathan Haidt likes to point out about that very phenomenon of people giving. If you look at look at how people operate and look at a dichotomy between people who are universalist in their view and people who are particularist in their view. And of course, we're Jewish. I don't know from your last name if that, I'll bet
Yeah.
you are too.
I
Yes,
am.
thought so. And in reading the book, you had some mention of like folks from Eastern Europe. I thought, oh yeah, my Judar was flashing,
Right.
and that phenomenon of being Jewish is a lot about that balance between being particularist and being universalist, because we don't claim, even religious Jews don't claim that everybody should be Jewish. It's very different from many anyway, religious Christians who say, no, ours is the right way, and our job is to get everybody to be like us. Well, we don't say that. And what Haidt points out is that folks who have a particularist participation, like members of particular churches, tend to be more generous in all of the various measures of giving, volunteering their time, giving money, even to people outside their in-group, than people who have a universalist perspective. It's like, no, I'm not part of any particular religion or particular group. I love everybody. Yeah, that's lovely, but they don't give as much. And I always find it interesting because that phenomenon of, I should love people close to me and I should love everyone. If I don't love people close to me more, I'm not going to love everyone else very well either. You know, that's a natural phenomenon. The notion of, yeah, we are tribal. We need to have loyalty to our tribes, and yet we also need to have loyalty to the collective good of all. And it always fascinates me that, religious folks who non-religious folks tend to think of us, oh, they're nasty. Religious folks tend to be much more giving than non-religious folks.
Hmm.
Even though religious folks, if they're fundamentalists, they can be very nasty.
Right.
But it's
But they
just a
give.
but they give. Yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon.
That is interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think we're facing that we've never really faced, until maybe the last 100 years, is that we have the capacity to destroy life as we know it if
Mm.
we allow our addiction to power and our need to dominate others to get our own needs met and to victimize other people and justify it by considering them inferior or unworthy or lazy or whatever we do. Um, that we're really in danger of the whole boat sinking. And
Mhm.
I think that's part of what, in a family, in one family, if we look at one dysfunctional family, we know that people will carry their dysfunction out of that family if they don't have a chance to heal and have, love and belonging and safety and all the things that we're talking about. Um, and I think we need to know that as a human race and as Americans. And I think that's really where we stand. And that was part of the reason why I wrote this book, because I think we're at a very pivotal place in the evolution of humanity. And really, how I think about it is if I'm on a boat that's sinking and I don't know how to swim, if you grab my hand and you're Black or you're Muslim or you're trans or you're whatever, I'm not going to care
Mm. Yeah.
because I'm just going to want that hand to pull me out of the
Yeah.
water.
We
And I think,
we're all in it together. It is an interesting one of the things, so much of human behavior isn't all that new, but one
right,
of the things that is new is that we have power now to do things to destroy the whole that no
right,
one tribe ever had.
that's right,
So a tribe, it could work in sort of a grand view of the whole human species. It could work to have tribes that would go conquer and exterminate other tribes. That no longer works because if
exactly.
you try and exterminate another tribe, you're potentially exterminating the entire earth.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we are in new territory. One of the things I liked about your book that you often pointed out, and this is with respect to that notion of we're all a family, that in a family that's working at all, you don't just let one kid starve.
Right.
You
You
know,
don't.
you support everybody, even if they have, needs that are different from some of the other ones. You make sure that everybody's at least got the basics.
Right.
And that is not how we've been functioning as a human family.
Right. And we're suffering the aftermath of that because just like in a family, if one child is abused or neglected or thrown out, most likely, not every, there's no one size fits all, but most likely that person is going to have a really rough time. And
Mm.
they're either going to act in some way, or they're going to act out, or both.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we're seeing massively in our country and all over the world, that people who are being targeted and abused and neglected and deprived and being seen as unworthy and judged just for, some very common denominator that they share are suffering. And I think one of the tips of that iceberg is all these mass shootings, that
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
that there are people who are so injured. They're so deprived of love and belonging and safety, and they're so enraged and they're so in pain that they've really lost their connection to their own humanity.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is our country's obligation, as well as a community and a family obligation, to look at and not blame people for their symptoms, even if they're horrendous, but
Mhm.
for us to commit to really trying to understand what set them up to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that attitude that you're describing, I think, I use the word faith for that actually, because it says, okay, we're all valid, even when we do horrible things. I'm not discounting the role of moral judgment. It's got to be there. I'm also noting exactly as you're saying, wow, when somebody is, we're acting out of whatever forces are happening at the time. And if we understand those better rather than simply condemning them, we've got a much better shot at helping people not have to do things like mass shootings.
I mean, absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why I think psychology is such a missing piece. in the conversation and in our common knowledge. Because, when I first was a therapist, I worked a lot with children.
Mm.
And almost every child I saw for therapy was symptomatic, whether they were wetting the bed or hitting other children or failing to thrive in school or isolating. Um, they were almost, I would say 99% of those children were suffering from a conflict in their home. It wasn't, they were the symptom bearer of the discord. And usually it was between the parents, and often it was a really conflictual divorce. And they were the symptom bearer for the pain in the family. And they were the one that got brought to therapy. They were the one who had the most overt symptom that showed in
Yeah.
public, right? And I think we have to look at the most dysfunctional and symptomatic people in society the same way. They are the symptom bearers for the ills of a society as well as their families. And that puts a whole other lens on. Are we just looking to punish people and lock them up? Or do we really want to get to the causes?
Mm. Yeah.
Or both?
Well, how can people get in touch with you, and how can they find your book? And what should we put in the what link should we put in the session notes for you?
Well, I'm on all the social media, most of them, LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I have a lot of videos on YouTube. And my website is my name. It's www.phyllisleavitt.com. And I have blogs on there, and I have lots of interviews on there, and I have information about my book. And you can contact me through my website. You can also just write to me at phyllis@phyllisleavitt.com. And I'm happy to talk with anyone and share more. And I have a free PDF on my website if you sign in for my newsletter. And it's based on one of the chapters in my book, which is about the 6 elements of repair after conflict in relationship, because I think we're so lacking in how do we come back after we've had a big disagreement? How do we reconnect? Because that's also part of what's missing from, I think, the largest political agendas. Like, do we repair this, or do we just keep fighting until I beat you?
It's parenthetically, I'm in about an hour from when we're doing this recording, I'm going to be interviewed by our local CBS affiliate about my book. And one of the things that they might be asking me about, they seemed interested in this, is how can I apply the very ideas you're just describing, that notion of repair
Yeah, because
in
I
a
think
broader
it's
context.
too easy to cancel people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right,
And
right.
I'm talking about betrayal and forgiveness in the context of lots of sorts of relationships, be they partners or other kinds of relationships. How can one apply that more broadly? Very similar to what you're talking about, actually.
Yeah, and I have a whole chapter in my book on that, and that could be applied in Congress and government and schools and businesses. It could be applied anywhere. It's just basic, really functional, healthy human relations are, and they're basically based on us taking responsibility for ourselves. I had a instructor in graduate school in a couples therapy class, and one of the things that he said that I've never forgotten is that the couples who do the best from therapy are those who learn to take responsibility for themselves and their part in whatever's going on. And I think that's just true in human relations, period. And what's your book? I'm just curious.
It's here it comes. Yeah, betrayal and forgiveness, how to
Oh,
navigate the turmoil and learn to trust again. Just came out a few days ago. It was just published.
beautiful, beautiful, needed.
I hope so. I think so.
Yes.
That's why I wrote it. Well, thank you so much for doing
Yes,
this.
thank you. So again, Phyllis's book is America in Therapy, a new approach to hope and healing for a nation in crisis.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. You guys are wonderful.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Well, welcome back, and nice that we had Phyllis on, who's going to help us heal that nation.
Absolutely. And Lord knows the nation
Thank you,
needs
Phyllis.
healing.
We sure do.
Thank you, Phyllis, indeed. If you have any comments for us or suggestions for us, such as, for example, suggestions of people we should interview or books we should review or whatever, just topics you want us to talk
that
about.
you think that might be a good topic for us, or if you think you would be a good guest on our show,
All of
you
the
can
above.
go to our website, ctin7.com, and that's the numeral 7. Do not spell it out. So CT as in couples therapy in 7.com.
And when you go there, you will see it's easy to send us a message. And one of the ways, I think there's a way just to send email, or you can just email us, Bruce at ctn7.com or Judy at ctn7.com works as well. And if you want to do that, I've been suggesting to folks, if you want to record something by way of feedback,
Yes.
or record something you think we might enjoy enough to actually put on our show, feel free to do that. We would love to have that as well. A couple more words for, you were going to say something?
I was going to put in a plug for the other 2 books.
Please do.
Okay. Bruce's other 2 books. It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. And then the book that started it all, at least it spurred our podcast, Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
We've been doing this podcast now for 4 years.
I know. Can you believe it?
And having a ball.
Having a ball. We've
And I
had
think-
wonderful guests.
I forgot what number. I think this episode is number 165, I believe.
Wow.
Somewhere in close to that. So we've done, and they've just been delightful. And I always tell folks, why do we do it? Well, we do it because it's fun. I think we're offering something really helpful, and I'm just so delighted to be doing it with you, which is why I wanted to start it with you in the first place.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a lot of fun for me too, and we've met some wonderful people and had great guests on, and I've learned so much by doing it, so I hope you have too.
Yeah. So let us know what you think. And of course, do the stuff on social media that lets people know about our podcast. Now, follow us, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform, rate us, leave a review, and just tell folks about us. That's how people will find out. And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.